Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Nitzan. I'm the marketing manager here at Alcide, and together with us today, our friend from CircleCI, Sam. Say hello to everyone. They can see you, that's fine. So before we get started, I would like to mention that this session is being recorded, and we will send you the recording right after the webinar. And also, we would like to hear from you today. So if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to submit them at the Q&A tab you can find here below. And I think with that, we can, I will intro you, Sam. So Sam Olukotun, a solution engineer from CircleCI. And right after that, Yaniv Peleg-Tsabari from Alcide, our VP product. And Sam, go ahead, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Nitzan, and greetings everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. I will start by sharing my screen here. And there we go. Nitzan, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Great, thank you. All right, and so today we're going to be talking about, so I'm just going to give a quick introduction to CircleCI Orbs, and then I'll be passing over the mic to Yaniv, and he'll be giving more of an in-depth discussion of the Alcide product, as well as demonstrate the integration between Alcide and the CircleCI. And at the end, like Nitzan said, we do have the floor is open for questions. As the webinar goes on, you can submit questions in the middle, but then at the end, we're also going to open the floor for another round of Q&As as well. So diving right into it, just a quick intro, blurb about CircleCI. Our goal, our mission in the whole software delivery ecosystem is to try to make it as easy as possible to go from engineers having an idea, building their app, and delivering those apps and those ideas to customers in a quick, timely manner without compromising on quality. And just a brief introduction and background on CircleCI. We were founded in 2011. We've now grown to over 220 plus employees spread across 5 continents. And we've also been doing a lot of re-architecting on the platform. For instance, in 2017, we launched a new version of our platform called CircleCI 2.0, and we gradually phased out 1.0 to have the improvements of 2.0. And currently, we're running over 1 million builds per day in the cloud, and that's just to speak to the kind of volume that we're currently servicing on our platform. With that said, just jumping right into where CircleCI fits in the whole software delivery lifecycle process, in CircleCI, really, you can think of us as an orchestration tool that sits in the middle where we handle a lot of the concerns that revolve around your building, the testing, and the delivery of your application. So CircleCI sits right between the VCS, your version control system, be it GitHub or Bitbucket, and we also sit in between your deployment environments or where you're going to be delivering any of your artifacts. So if you're going to be shooting your Docker images to Docker Hub, for instance, to the container registry, or if you're going to be deploying to servers, we sit in between the VCS and getting those applications and your products out to the customers. And with that said, since some people might not have been familiar with the CircleCI platform, I'm just going to give a quick demo and show you what CircleCI looks like. And right now, I'm just showing a simple workflow on our page, on my page, that's just doing a quick test, build, and deployment cycle. And so when we talk about jobs on CircleCI, what we're really talking about are these independent tasks themselves that you run on CircleCI as part of your CI/CD pipeline. So for instance, if you want to test, you want to do your building, if you want to run linting, if you're doing security scanning, all of those will be individual jobs within your pipeline. And what I want to show here is the fact that you can parallelize some of these jobs. For instance, I'm going here with a workflow that runs my testing and my build jobs in parallel. And so if my test fails or if my build fails, I know I'm not going to deploy to staging. However, since my testing and my build jobs don't depend on one another, I can run both of them in parallel, save myself some time on my whole deployment cycle. And once both of them pass, then I can have my deploy to staging job run. And something else I want to point out is the fact that each one of these jobs can be independently configured with your own execution environment or operating systems or whatever toolchain you need for that particular job. We'll take the test job, for instance. I could be running this with a CPU that has maybe with a virtual machine that has maybe 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. And if I know that my build job is going to need more RAM, or if I'm going to need more CPU, I can actually assign a larger resource class to this. And so the benefit of having this configurability and this option to do plug and play of different resource classes and environments for each one of these jobs gives you an advantage, because unlike some other platforms where you have to provision independent infrastructure for each one of your tool chains, on CircleCI, you can essentially mix and match and configure things to work for whatever your team is doing. One other thing I want to touch on real quick is the configuration on CircleCI happens in a YAML file. And this is a file that you would typically check into the root of your application in your repo. And one of the benefits of maintaining this config in code, as opposed to doing this in a UI like some of the other platforms do, is that this allows you to have a deterministic approach to your build pipeline, where nothing changes in your build pipeline without it going through the PR review process. And you always have documentation and logs of when things changed, who changed them, why they changed, as well as the previous values they changed from. So this just makes it a lot easier to repeat what you build, what your pipeline might have looked like in the past, or if you want to revert to previous settings. And so high level, that's just a quick demonstration, quick overview of what things look like on CircleCI. One other thing I'd just like to show, because this is a fun feature for me, is when things break, how do you debug? How do you find out what's going wrong? On CircleCI, part of the benefit of having this UI that gives you feedback about your job is that you can quickly identify where the errors or where the issues are in your pipeline. So what I'm showing here is a workflow where I've intentionally introduced an error into the test phase. And when this was running, if this was running in production, for instance, one of the benefits that this allows me is that I can quickly tell which job is failing. And furthermore, I can click on this job and introspect, look more into details as what is going on with that particular job. On CircleCI, each one of the steps, each one of the commands you run prints an output that gets logged to the UI. So whenever there's an error, or whenever you see a failing build, for instance, like that, you can quickly go find where that error occurs and then find out the output for that command that caused that error. So in terms of debugging and speeding up the time it takes to find errors and fix them, this is a really big benefit and advantage over a lot of other platforms. Furthermore, right in here, you can actually rerun this job with SSH. So if you're still trying to debug or figure out what's going on within the environment of the container itself that's running the job, you can rerun it with SSH, and this opens an SSH port on the container that lets you remotely connect and see what's going on within the container in real time. So again, in terms of increasing the efficiency of your debug cycle, that's a feature that really helps developers to get up and running quickly on our platform. So that's a quick overview of what CircleCI does, what things look like. If you have any questions that we mentioned earlier, please go into that Q&A tab and submit the questions, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. So continuing with our presentation here, one thing I want to talk about is Orbs. So before I actually go in here, let's go back to our config file to be easier to illustrate the Orb concept from here. So let's assume that we're building a project and I'm running a team where I have 6 different projects running. And each one of those projects I know need this build step. So one thing I can do is, instead of copy and pasting this piece of config across all my multiple projects, I can templatize this step and write it as this thing we call an orb in CircleCI. And what it allows me to do then is I can check that orb into a central repository. And so for subsequent teams that need that same build step, instead of having to rewrite all of this config for themselves, they can just import that orb into their config and then invoke the commands that they need from the orb. So again, that's one feature that just helps to streamline the config file and make sure that your shared functionality is being managed from a central location. So going back to the presentation then, waiting for it to load, and there we go. So like I mentioned earlier, the Orbs is it's a reusable, shareable package of the configuration file. You can just think about it as any piece, any chunk of YAML config that you feel is necessary to share or that you're going to be using across multiple projects or multiple teams. You can templatize it into an orb and then share it as a package that other teams can import instead of having to re-implement the same logic over again. And this page just shows the different aspects of the config file that can be templatized as an orb. And it just goes to show that if it's a command or if it's your executor or if it's a job, no matter what aspect or whatever function you have in your config file, you can export it as an orb and share it with other members of the team. And again, the whole point, the benefit of that is that it streamlines your config file and it makes this logic easier to maintain, because then you'll be maintaining it from a central repo. When things change, you go to one place to fix it, as opposed to having to copy and paste and make changes across multiple config files. And so for our Orbs, really one of the other advantages that the Orbs creates is that it provides this ability, it provides this interface for you to integrate with a lot of third-party tools that you might be using as part of your pipeline. And so as part of that effort, both CircleCI, our technology partners, and a big part of our developer community have written some of these Orbs already. And so if you're trying to get up and running with some of these technology partners, including Alcide, for instance, that we have with us here today, we have Orbs already pre-written on our Orb registry. And so it allows you to get up and running quickly, because then you can just import all these chunks of config right away without having to start implementing them from scratch. And so that's all about Orbs and CircleCI. If you need more information, here's some links to documentation, to our support page. And also this presentation is going to be made available to you all after the webinar, so you'll have access to all these links as well. And with that, I'm going to be passing it over to Yaniv to talk about Alcide and the integration with CircleCI. Yaniv, over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Let me share my screen. Okay, let me know once you see it.
Your screen.
Super. I'll pop up the presentation. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining again today. So as Sam illustrated, I'm going to double click on how you can integrate Alcide into your CI/CD pipeline to make sure it is secure as early as possible and across your estate. But before we double click on that, a short overview of about Alcide, who we are and what exactly we are doing. So Alcide is all about Kubernetes security. We provide security from dev to production with a clear focus around workloads, specifically on Kubernetes platforms. If we think about security, we divide the world into two main domains. On the left side, you can see the network security. This is where we started our journey from, essentially monitoring the network to pinpoint suspicious issues, to mitigate them, and also to do some preventive measures to stop it or to contain it as much as possible. On the right side, you can see continuous hygiene and compliance. We will double click on some of these capabilities today. Essentially, what we are targeting here is to make sure the configuration of the Kubernetes environment meet best practices. And I will explain later on why it is quite a complex task to achieve today. And also doing some auditing and continuous monitoring of the control plane. We will double click on that as well. We do all of that with an AI engine on both domains. We can do that on the network side and also on the control plane side. And the support of our offering is on all regular distributions of Kubernetes, public cloud, private cloud, and also on-prem. We also have some LT integrations and partnerships. You can see some of it here in this slide. Fortinet is one example, but we have LT partnership with other security giants as well. The reason for that is that today, in many cases, deployments are hybrid by nature. And by hybrid, I mean that you can find legacy application or monolithic application, as well as a lot of companies moving to microservices and distributed applications. Regular firewalls and traditional security is not enough. Kubernetes, in a way, is a black box, and somebody needs to put the light on that black box to understand what exactly is going on. And this is exactly where we chime in, and we work together with those security veterans to achieve end-to-end security. Double-clicking on our offering. So we have a variety of services. You can see here how they span across the pipeline and the various deployment stages. Today, we will focus on the Alcide Advisor, and I will provide a lot of details about that later on, and how you can achieve hygiene across your deployments. By hygiene, I mean how you can make sure configuration-wise there are no soft spots or vulnerabilities that attackers can use to penetrate your environment, we cover security, but not only, and we will double click on that later on. Other than that, we have other domains. The Alcide K audit is a relatively new service that we designed to ingest audit logs of Kubernetes. And we do that to serve two main purposes. One, to meet compliance and organizational best practices or policies and controls. It allows you to configure audit policies to put the spotlight on violations with regard to that. A good example can be, for example, if you do not allow administrators or any other user to directly log in or connect to resources in your cluster, so you can design a policy to let you know about that. The other domain that K-Audit covers is looking for unknown issues. And the way we do that is with the machine learning that we developed in-house, that using the audit that we ingest, we build profiles of users, system accounts, and also of the resources in the cluster. With this baseline, we can actually build a best practice or expected behavior of those resources and users. And once something suspicious is going on, we can easily pinpoint and let you know about that. And it's relatively difficult to do it manually by examining audit logs. One example for that can be an attacker that with a successful maybe phishing attempt is able to take some of your credentials and disguise himself as one of the users. Or it can also be maybe an internal user that went to the wrong side, the Snowden way maybe, and is trying to do some harmful stuff. And this specific service can also provide a lot of LT understanding of what's going on in your estate, the Kubernetes way. The last domain that I'd like to cover here is the runtime. In the runtime, we have healthy network monitoring capabilities. With cloud native specifically also for Kubernetes, there is a lot of east-west traffic. Majority of the traffic is east-west. So we can monitor that. We can also monitor north-south traffic. And based on this, the monitoring capabilities, we can do primarily three things. We can correlate the traffic to threat intelligence, bad reputation, sources or destinations that need your attention. We can build a baseline of the network behaviors for specific resources and entities within the Kubernetes cluster and let you know when there is something new or suspicious. For example, it can be maybe an unscanned source code that for some reason is trying to connect with the Bitcoin mining, so we let you know about that. And last is the microservices firewall capabilities. We have a lower level capability of attaching firewall policies to the microservices level. And by that, we can achieve two things. One, we can do preventive measure to make sure you segregate your domain as much as possible to achieve compliance and also to achieve segregation if there is, for example, a successful penetration or breach attempt. And to minimize the blast radius, and also to stop suspicious activities that you are able to identify with our threat intelligence and anomaly detection. With that, let's double click on advisor and why we need it. So a lot of people, when they think about Kubernetes, even today, the first thing that comes in mind is images and Docker, but Kubernetes is much more than that. If we deep dive into the Kubernetes layer, we can see that there are many, many components, not just containers or images. We have the etcd, the API server, the kubelet, and a lot of other resources that you need to pay attention to. You can see some of the attack surface and the points that you need to understand. Now, it's quite complex. Kubernetes changed rapidly. It's a relatively new technology, and there is lack of knowledge in many organizations of how to properly address that. And usually we can find a lot of working ends manipulating and contributing to the configuration of Kubernetes. It's very difficult to maintain one solid posture, security postures, taking all of that into consideration. And this is exactly where the advisor comes in. One example that to illustrate what can go wrong if you are not doing so So Shopify, I'm sure most of you are familiar with them, is one of the biggest e-commerce platforms around the world. In last year, KubeCon, they illustrated a serious vulnerability they found in their system. They hired a researcher. The researcher was able to use a server-side request forgery to put his hands on the cloud credential, and using that, he was able to log into one of the Kubernetes nodes. He escaped this node and was able to fetch metadata information of the cluster and essentially use the cluster token to take control over the entire cluster. Now, just imagine what will happen if that was not a researcher, but a genuine attacker. He can take down your clusters, essentially your application and business, or steal your sensitive information. Certainly something we would like to prevent as much as we can. And in this specific case, it was quite easy to prevent it. All it takes is to make sure you have the right role-based access configuration and also some Kubernetes policies that will prevent something like that from happening. So how Advisor can help you understand what's going on and making sure you meet best practices. Advisor can be deployed on each and every of your environment. You can distribute it for testing, staging, or production environment. And then you can decide. You can use the scanner inside your cluster or out of your cluster. As Sam showed you, you can integrate the scanner with your CI/CD platform and run a scan continuously, or in early stages before you even move to production, to make sure you come as clean as possible, free of vulnerabilities and risks. Advisor can help you mitigate one solid policy that you can validate across your clusters to make sure they are all conforming to that, or you can choose to work with specific policies per cluster. By that, you can achieve monitoring over time to make sure there are no degradations and that you have conformance around your deployments. The Advisor comes with some LT operational values as well, like app formation that gives you a blueprint of your application deployment to make sure nothing is missing, like monitoring services or even security agent or something like that. And last, Advisor also support enforcement. You can actually enforce deployments or admissions that violate your policy to make sure they will not add risk to your clusters. A few quick guidelines, how we usually recommend our customer to use the Advisor. So it does not really matter where or when you deploy the Advisor. You can do that again in early stages, before you release, after your release, or continuously monitor the operation around your clusters. Usually step number one will be taking a snapshot of your cluster or clusters to understand your security posture. So you will get a very clear report that shows you the finding by priority. And then you need to do some homework to analyze what is legit, what is not, and what needs to be fixed. We also provide recommendation how to do that. Usually it can take some time because you need to involve some other people in this process. And this is where step number 2 comes handy. Even if you don't exactly understand the posture or the right posture, you can still continue and run scans to make sure there are no hygiene drift. We have the ability to let you know the delta between the last scan and the previous one, and this way you can make sure that from this point on there will be no new violation that poses risk on your deployments. And last is the prevention. Again, we can prevent admission in real time using integration with admission control, or we can stop deployments in the CI/CD by failing the pipeline if there are critical findings. You can choose if you want to do that or just get an alert. A lot of people ask me why we chose to do that in the CD stage and not in early stages. So one, we do plan to provide in the future capability of scanning in early stages, like scanning the M chart probably. But to illustrate why it is important to do the scan in the CD state or after deployment is because there are different method of working and combining your configs and deployments such that if you will not scan after you deploy, you may miss and will not see the real, or I would say the configuration after all the rendering. One example for that can be Elm, Terraform, or Ansible, that in some cases you can tweak them in a way that wiring of secrets, images, or even role-based access will happen when you actually deploy. So if you will scan before that, you will not necessarily get the true visibility of what's going on with your deployments. There are some aspects of live cluster scanning, like network policies, if they are in place or not, and also pod security policies. And last example is the admission control mutating capability. So even if you think you have a legit configuration, there might be an admission controller involved in the process that may change the configuration after you are executing deployments. And in order to actually see the right deployment configuration, you need to do that after successful deployment. Istio, by the way, is one example of an entity that is using a mutating admission control. Quick example of what we call image whitelisting to understand this process. So step number one, assume, this is on the left side in the bottom, assume that the DevOps is changing the configuration of Kubernetes in a way that they are including a new image registry that was not used until now. They will, in step two, they will commit it to Git and will start a static test process. It can be unit testing, integration testing, and so on. So even if you scan containers and images, you will not necessarily spot that there is a new image registry in the Kubernetes configuration. And this is where we come into play. So once you deploy, in this case, stage number 3, in the staging stage, our advisor will run the scan and will spot, and this is number 5, and will let you know about all the resources that violate your policy. In this case, as you can see next to point number 4, it will illustrate that there is a new image registry which is not authorized, probably not scanned, and can possess a risk on your environment. Sorry. So as you can see, we have a lot of security checks and flavors. I mentioned some of them. We can scan for secret leaking. We can also scan for privileged workloads to make sure that there are no undesired privileged workload, meaning making sure that only workloads that require privileged access will get that. Unless you do that, you are expanding your blast radius, and using privileged access is like using root. And we can also support checks for compliance, as you can see here in the PCI example. But not only that, we also have checks that can help you make sure your operational aspects are maintained, like liveliness and readiness probes, and also some best practices around limiting resources like memory and CPU utilization of specific resources. Here you can see example of the entire category of tests that we support. Today we have roughly 75 tests out of the box. We continuously issue more and more. And we also issue update for checks like CVEs, CIS benchmark like continuously, and you get it as a feed in our system. So Sam illustrated how we can integrate into the CircleCI pipeline. You can see, you can later on fetch this link and see some other LT integration that we all have out of the box. And last, I'd like to mention that the advisor is available in a free version. In this link, you can register to that and get it for free. I will soon explain to you in the demo how exactly you can use that. So you can use that and also the guidelines in the GitHub and in the CodeLab link. And it takes like 5 minutes to onboard the advisor and get the result, and I really encourage you to use that. So now let me move to a quick demo. What you can see now is our platform. The view that you see in front of you is the inventory of your cluster node and resources. In order to use the advisor, usually step number one is to onboard it to your cluster. You can choose the SaaS way, which I will show what it gives you later on, or the CI/CD way. If you choose the CI/CD way, essentially you integrate the advisor into your pipeline, the CI/CD tool, and this is the example of CircleCI. It only takes a few lines of code to do that, as you can see here in front of you. So once you do that, you direct the scanner to fetch the policy locally or from our platform, and you can also dictate where you would like to get the result. In this specific use case, you will get local result. This is how the result look like in the local way. You get an HTML report for each and every scan that nicely illustrate all the findings by priority with a nice dashboard. And if you get into specific findings, you see the criticality, the description, and the recommendation how to sort them. Quickly jumping into our platform, if you choose the SaaS way, sorry, or what we call in-cluster mode, you get the benefit of scanning your entire fleet of clusters and get a consolidated view of result. If I jump into the dashboard, this is how you can see the result in our platform. You can see finding across your estate. You can drill down into the findings by the test categories. So you can choose, hey, I would like to see the test that failed the most and start the investigation from there. Or you can choose to see it by the cluster. So if I click on the cluster view, for each cluster, you get a breakdown of the findings, and you can also see it by the namespace. And here as well, once you decide to focus on specific tests, you can drill down into the actual results and see the recommendation and the description of how you can exactly remediate that. And it's very easy to slice and dice it. You can also tweak your profiles. If you go to the profile view, here you can see, by the way, a nice example how you can get feed of a new update of the advisor package, the new checks that we constantly add. So once you go to the profile, you can choose from the out-of-the-box checks what exactly you would like to execute. For each specific check, you can set the severity, and you can also exclude specific resources from the checks. That is very important to reduce the noise once you approve specific resources and decide that they are not violating a specific check or control. And that's basically it. Again, it's very easy, and it takes like 5 minutes to onboard and get your first report and understand your security posture across your organization. And with that, I think that we will move to Q&A.
Yeah, so we do have one question, no, a few more. Okay, so can you please elaborate what kind of policy checks are available?
Yeah, sure. Let me maybe share again the the platform. So here on the in the policy, you can actually see all the test categories. Okay, so again, in high level, we have tests or checks that are associated with security best practices. We have checks that are associated with compliance. You can see, for example, the Kubernetes benchmark here, the category. And we have checks around security the operational best practices, like orphaned resources, ops conformance, and ops health. Variety of tests. You could, by the way, you can find a lot of information about that in the advisor data sheet, or if you use the free version, you can also drill down into each and every test in the platform.
Okay, we do have 2 more questions. Does the Alcide advisor need to be on the same Kubernetes cluster that it is scanning? If not, then where should it be hosted, and how does it get access to scan other Kubernetes clusters?
Okay, so as I showed you before, we have 2 methods of operation. One is, yes, you can install the advisor or the scanner in your cluster. And by that, you are propagating the result into our platform and get a consolidated view of the result across your deployments, but you can also decide to use the on-premise or the CI/CD way. In this way, you actually integrate the scanner in with your CI/CD platform, or you can actually run it by yourself locally. And in this mode, you can choose to fetch policies, the checks configuration from our platform, or export it and use it totally locally. So you can choose either way. It provides the same level of checks and securities.
One last question. Does Alcide create snapshots of existing clusters, or is it that to be done by some other tool?
Yeah, so the advisor, one of the beauties with advisor is that we can provide a snapshot of, again, the security or the best practices. So once you run a scan, you can lock it in, and then you can reference future scan to that, to these findings, and you can easily find deltas to make sure what changed across time. And as I showed you in the policy, you can whitelist specific findings. We can also create a blueprint of your application formation, such that, for example, that let's assume you have a master cluster. You can take a snapshot of that, an application snapshot, meaning you can put on record all the resources that need to be deployed. And then later on, you can check when you duplicate this deployment, or maybe over time when there are changes, you can run the scan and correlate the application formation or the current resource format to the older one or to the master one to see if there are changes. This is very valuable to make sure, again, operationally, that you've not missed anything, like monitoring services and stuff like that, or that security agent are deployed as necessary. And that's basically it.
Okay, Sam, anything else?
Awesome. No, that was all. Just wanted to say a quick thank you to you, Nixon and Yaniv, for joining us today and for the work you've put into the org. And also a quick thank you to our audience for joining us. I hope you all learned something fun and interesting today.
Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night or a good day, depending where you are. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.